All this event take place as part of the execution of the President's decree of June 16, 2026, number 4. We have 1 month left until the voting day. At the same time, it's highly likely that efforts of our enemies will be aimed at extremist and protest actions and stunts to discredit Russia, its leadership, to discredit those abroad, especially during this election campaign, to be vigilant and not to give in. Have already done. In 152 states, there are 319 polling stations. 312 are organized by the heads of the Russian diplomatic and consulate missions. 7 stations are arranged in the city of Baikonur. Addresses of the polling stations can be found at the official website of the Central Election Commission of the Russian Federation or internet resources of the respective Russian missions. To ensuring the right of all our citizens abroad to vote in the place convenient to them is something that can be done almost in real time at the account of the MFA and foreign missions in social networks. I would like to say that we daily publish updated information about new polling stations with all the necessary contact information. In the voting day, we will share, as you know, we do it every time, live broadcasts from the polling stations all over the world. For the convenience of the users, the official website of the Russian MFA starting now will have a theme-related section, Elections to the State Duma of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation of 2026. The section will include legal framework of the election processes, as well as a list of theme-related interview and statements that is constantly updated, of our representatives abroad. Please take a look, use it. To give us your reaction. If you have anything to say, please say that to us, to our website, to your proposals, send your proposals to the Department for Information and the Press, share your ideas. We will note them. Now let's the situation around the Ukrainian crisis. The combat capabilities of the Ukrainian armed forces are consistently shrinking because of the effective actions of the Russian armed forces to suppress the military capabilities of the Kiev regime. In an attempt to retain power, the Zelensky regime and equipment supplied by NATO countries. In the last week, the criminal attacks of Ukrainian armed forces daily. Maybe it is not the best idea to talk about average numbers, but given the fact that we're going to tell you these cases in great detail. These average figures are necessary so that people abroad who doubt the essence and the nature of actions of the Kiev regime, for them to see. So in average, in the last week, about 60 civilians were killed, 6 were wounded, and 10 killed. Belgorod region, the biggest Number of victims was registered following a Ukrainian drone strike on August 16th in Rakitansk region against a bus transporting the workers of the local enterprise. One woman was killed, 9 wounded, and following a missile strike of the Ukrainian armed forces against a residential building in the village of Koloskovo. The Ukrainian terror in the Belgorod region resulted in 9 civilians being killed, at least 34 were wounded. The Bryansk region. Missile and drone strikes killed 2 civilians, and more people were wounded. I would like to underline yet again, those are all civilian people. On August 14th, a multi-story residential building was attacked. One civilian was killed. Seven more people, the shellings and detonation of explosives resulted in the killing of 6 civilians. In total, at least 89 people were wounded. On August 13th, a train was attacked. 6 civilians were wounded. The same very day, Ukrainian armed forces launched attack against the medical facility. Ukrainian attacks resulted in the wounds of 24 citizens. The Ukrainian strikes in the satellite city of Zaporozhye and PP and Energodar led to 1 civilian being killed, 17 more sustaining fragment wounds. Also, arrivals were registered in the regional cancer center and the fire unit. This is inhuman. This barbaric and atrocious. Krasnodar region. The attacks and year-old child. At least 14 more people were wounded, including a 6-year-old child. The Kursk region. Here, 2 civilians were killed, 3 wounded. LPR. 2 civilians were killed here, including a 13-year-old boy in the city of Kremenaya. At least 14 people were wounded, including 2 ambulances and water carriers were subject to attacks. That's who they are waging war against. In Sebastopol on August 13, during the demining, 4 rescuers and 1 security guard was killed. At least 3 civilians were wounded, including 1 child. In the Kherson region, 2 civilians were killed. They were a married couple going in a car. In the Rostov region, 5 people were wounded. Kamensk-Shakhtinsky took the brunt. In the Moscow region, drone attacks killed 1 civilian, 7 wounded. In Shatura, severe traumas. Were given to a 90-year-old child. In the Ramenskoye region, a 10-year-old girl. There's information about victims in various regions are continued to be updated. The Rodion Miroshnik shares this information regularly. The Kiev regime terms and the battlefields. The legal Russian law enforcement continue to collect evidence to bring to justice the officials in the Kiev regime, militants, commanders of the Ukrainian armed forces, and foreign mercenaries. The Investigative Committee of Russia state that by now the investigations of more than 1,150 cases have been completed. The recent example is the sentence of the Ukrainian militant from Azov National Regiment, Igor Fetchenyak. 20 years of imprisonment was given to him in the strict regime prison. He was found guilty in participation of terrorist community. Now let's have a look what Zelensky did. Has a dire need for those who are willing to go to death for the interest of the corrupted Zelensky team and his Western sponsors. They stopped hiding it at the official level. The Ombudsman of the Verkhovna Rada on Human Rights, Dmitry Lubinets, confessed publicly that only 2 to 3% of those drafted go to the far front. The majority of the rest desert on their way to the far front or from military units. We cannot verify this information. Maybe they killed on the way to the far front, and it is possible because this is a now they know that for Zelensky and his foreign sponsors, they are nothing but cannon fodder. It is said they did not realize that right away. Those drafted face severe violence. It cannot be hidden. The whole world can see the videos with women. Tutorial center for the recruitment. Their hands are stained with blood, and the wives, sisters, mothers of those to be drafted, they kneel before those monsters and beg them to spare them. That's what the for the money of the West, the money of those who for decades have been dreaming to get even with those Ukrainians and soldiers of the Red Army who defended Ukraine, their own land, from Nazism and fascism, and won back then. Right now, their successors, they what they do. Recently, Ukrainian General Prosecutor Ruslan Kravchenko published information about 10 employees of the Territorial Center for the Recruitment being arrested, who for months had been illegally arrested. People used tear gas against them, maimed and choked them. One of them had a phone background with a cynical motto: smoke, hook up, and send them to the far front. An MP of the Servant of the People fraction in Verkhovna of the Ukrainian TV channel named prices of the employees of the Territorial Center for the Recruitment for helping those drafted to buy their way out of going to the far front. That is $10,000 to $15,000 for a person. This is a tragedy of Ukraine, but this is organized. That is how they they are destroying a European state. The government of this country express solidarity with programs, ideas, and so on of the West. That's what the West does to
Ukraine is elaborating other rules of mobilization. Under these rules, Ukrainian men who have received a draft deferment are obliged to pay the armed forces of Ukraine a sum worth of 1 to 2 minimum wages. Have you ever seen it anywhere? Can you give me at least one example in history? Well, even in the books, it has never been described. It is quite a big amount of money for a common citizen. And no one tells them from Ukrainian leadership for which money they should leave. So Ukrainians will be literally forced to go to front not just for a portion of bread. Live. The Kiev regime toughens the mobilization rules. On the 29th of July, the Cabinet of Ministers has adopted a regulation which changes the procedures for the military register called Obereg. As of now, the men aged 18 to 60, when they apply for consular services such as passports, will undergo a check of their military data, and if there are no data in the military register about that particular person, he can be put on the military register automatically with the use of e-consul and or declared address of that particular citizen in Ukraine. It can be done even without the person showing up at the military and medical commission. Thus, Kiev officially cuts off escape routes for Ukrainians. It is not possible to escape recruitees and reservists will be stored in the Obereg register throughout the entire time as they are listed in the military register, and after they have been put off that list for other 75 years. It's quite an optimistic forecast as regards the time of survival for the Kiev regime. And the topic of the mottos under which the romanticized Maidan of 2013-2014 elected the current regime. They shouted the following mottos. Those who participate for the sake of peace, we are ready to talk to the devil himself, and they announced the end of the era of poverty, and so on and so forth. We can say for sure that the Ukrainian community has again been received. It's of no importance now. They simply entrust themselves to the political scammers. And who is more responsible, for those who deceive or those who have been deceived? It's hard to say. They promised a bright future at the price of cutting off the ties to Russia. But what was the result? Today we see how mobilized Ukrainians are transported to the register centers as their small children, mothers, and women see it. Wikidry phrase Gogol's novel Taras Bulba and ask, well, son, has the West helped you? It has created you this sort of anti-constitutional activity or action. And the second question would be, haven't the cookies presented by the Western representatives at Maidan proven too bitter? Wasn't poisoned oil or butter used to cook them? Did common Ukrainians really wanted to see Russia as enemy? Is it the sort of future they fought for? Did they want to sacrifice their lives to defend the interests of corrupted officials simply at the order of the West? No, it is not a rhetorical question. Of course they couldn't have. They thought that by those steps they would be able to stop corruption in Ukraine. They hoped that by participating in the Maidan events, they would develop that sort of democracy of which they had heard so much. They hoped to become progressive if they actively show their identity. And the squares they thought if they bring together enough tires to fire, and if the flames of these tires go higher, then it would make their future brighter. That's what you always hear when you are suggested to, when you are invited to violate the law. They simply violated the law of their own country. They violated their own constitution. They violated the law of civilization, the law of historical memory, the law of humanity, and even the God's law. They did it, but we will talk about it in greater detail later. A deputy of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, Daniel Getmantsev, coming from that same party, the servant of the people, sounds alarm. He tries to draw attention to the tragic consequences of the Zelensky's neo-Nazi policy. The population of the territories which are controlled by the Kiev regime has been reduced to no more than 20 million people. The annual loss exceeds 1 million. The mortality rate exceeds the birth rate by 4 times, and the public debt already has reached the level of $211 billion US. That is $10,000 for each remaining citizen of Ukraine. The US has a similar public debt, sovereign debt, and in these terms, Ukraine is really developing at a dramatic pace. It's no surprise to hear that there is a massive immigration from Ukraine to EU countries of men aged under 23. They fear the mobilization age will be reduced. They don't see themselves in the current Ukraine. They love their nature. They love their culture. They love their songs. Many Ukrainians even love the Ukrainian language. Many love both Ukrainian and Russian languages. They love which is Ukrainian, but they don't want to die for the corruption of Zelensky and their ultra-nationalist brigade. Shows that there is an increase of men who enjoy protection in the temporary protection in EU by 15%. Their number now has reached 1,190,000 people. In late July, the EU has toughened the rules for newly arriving Ukrainians. Starting from the 5th of August, they are no longer provided with temporary protection. Now, Ukrainian candidates to receive a temporary protection have to prove that they have already served in the armed forces of Ukraine or have been exempted from military service. So those who are ready to sacrifice their lives for the to the tolerance. What's happened to the human rights? They have forgotten them. Nothing remains. The West doesn't need either an independent or a prosperous Ukraine. If they needed it, they would have done exactly the contrary. Judging by the policy of the West of the recent years, Ukraine doesn't need, the West doesn't need Ukraine as a country. They consider it as a territory for neo-colonial exploitation of resources and using the local population to fuel the geopolitical conflict against Russia as a stronghold for long-term threatening of our country. The final goal is obvious. They want to of the neo-Nazi Kiev regime is definitely predetermined. Somehow it doesn't concern the West, and in this context I'd like to stress that the only guarantee of this has been repeatedly stressed by the Russian President Vladimir Putin. What does the West really want from Ukraine? How does it really perceive it? It's quite interesting. In global media, there have been publications which point to the fact that Ukraine is turning into an unprofitable project of the West. Look at what The Guardian has published together with the Financial Times. Military planning of the NATO in Ukraine has failed dramatically. It has turned out that appetites of the Zelensky regime dramatically increase the world production rates of Patriot missiles, for example. In Kiev, they no longer inform their publicity about the strikes because they have no missiles to defend the airspace. Now the sponsors already suspect something. In what corruption mire of the Kiev have billions of dollars and euros of Western taxpayers are lost. Well, I can give you an advice. Talk to immobility experts at the resorts in the Western Europe. Talk to developers about the investment flows from the territory of Ukraine. The current Kiev political establishment has become the largest investor into the luxury industry of the West. Now I'm asking the German journalists, why do you look away? Look at what's happening in France, in the UK, in Italy and in Spain and in Germany itself. Assets can be found in your countries, which have been stolen by the Ukrainian regime. Now let's move on. Capitals try to invent their own formats for negotiations on Ukraine, not to be left on the sidelines and the margins of history when the modalities of the settlement will be discussed in serious. By the way, we take note of such initiatives at various levels through the diplomatic channels. The neo-Nazi regime of Zelensky continues to honor the Hitler collaborators. They don't apply the shows the worst practices of necrophily. In Kiev, on the territory of the so-called National Military Memorial Cemetery, the remains of the founder of the were transported from Rotterdam. It was done ceremoniously with honors. Could we have imagined that Konovalets would become a hero of Ukraine? That Europeans would sink their heads to honor his memory? What would have happened to the veterans, to Ukrainians who were part of the Red Army, from common soldiers to commanders, those who were part of partisan units, those who suffered the horrors of the labor camps, those who survived, although they have been almost buried alive by the fascists, those who survived in children death camps. Was prepared for them by the West. We'll talk about it in greater detail later. Now what about the West? What does it say as it sees this campaign? Only Poland expressed its criticism. It looks like it now regrets its supplies of military equipment worth more than $4.5 billion of military help. Yes, that's exactly the amount it has provided to the Kiev regime. And as a result, it sees Kiev honoring those who wanted to $27.5 billion to support the Zelensky regime and accepted 1.7 million Ukrainians as refugees. As a humanitarian gesture, they had to provide jobs to those Ukrainians and feed them, wash them, educate them. In return, it saw Ukraine honoring those who killed Poles. They were not killed because they were citizens of one particular country. They were killed simply because they were Poles. And only us, only our country sounded alarm throughout these years. It called Poland to wake up from the zombie propaganda which flew on them from the Ukrainian media. They demanded the Polish citizens to pay more to the Kiev regime and promised that Kiev regime would be thankful. They promised Kiev would confess the errors and mistakes of their predecessors. They will never do so. Zelensky honors the Nazi henchmen from those who are accountable and responsible for massive killings of Poles, Jews, and Russians and other citizens of the historic region of Red Ruthenia, the current Lvov region, though Poles like to call it in the Eastern way Galicia, although we know as it was part of Poland, this territory was called Russian and Podkarpatskoye Voivodeship. Assembly on the resolution to find glorification of Nazism. Last time this document was adopted and approved on the 15th of December 2025 in New York at the plenary session of the 80th session of the General Assembly. It was supported by 119 countries. 51 countries were against it, 10 abstained. Western countries and satellites collectively opposed that resolution. They explain it simply by that fact that it is put forward by Russia, but it's not the only reason. The main reason is they don't see nothing wrong in honoring nationalism, collaborationism, and in glorifying what was born by fascism in the Western Europe. Now we know it.
Show that the true attitude of the state to the topic of glorification of Nazism and distortion of the outcomes of World War II. Today's Ukrainian national identity that has ostensibly been nurtured and to be developed in Ukraine is something that Zelensky regime historically characteristic for Ukraine. They try to make their population into Menkards and Ivans who doesn't remember their roots. And they believe into their own exclusiveness, but this is the way the animals do that. Why the Kiev regime does that? The answer is simple. They need people who cannot understand, who cannot tell wrong of right. It is easier to manipulate such people. It's easier to send them in Dnipropetrovsk. Sculpture and the pedestal of the memorial was taken down. It was the monument to a legendary Soviet military leader, general of the Soviet army, who received the title of the hero of the Soviet Union for crossing the Dnieper in 1944, Vasily Margelov. It is perplexing and cynical that the monument was taken down by the soldiers of the 25th Syicheslav Airborne Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. The Kiev authorities disregarded the memory of the legendary military leader. On monument of 8.5 meters to workers and sailors was also taken down. It was erected in 1958 in the then Yekaterinoslavl. The modern Ukraine is an independent state because of those workers and sailors who participated in the revolution of 1917. The Zelensky regime erases all this, and those who continue following him, all these facts from its territory, all of them will be achieved. Something I already mentioned. There's no sensible people in the world who wouldn't be outraged by the recent facts when remains are exhumated. in Europe and are buried in Ukraine. In our opinion, this is the outrageous erasure of historical memory and permissiveness and rehabilitation of those who stain themselves with terrible crimes and collaborationism with the Nazi regime. On August 18th, at the Crossweg Municipal Cemetery in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, exhumation of the remains of the founder and the first leader of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, Evgeny Konovalets, took place. You probably saw the videos how in Ukraine they were welcomed with state and military honors. Special attention goes to excessively theatrical nature of the ceremony that took place at night near the Patriarch's Cathedral of the Resurrection. Soldiers, together with representatives of the Konovalets military school, together formed a torch corridor. That's what they did. I cannot but note that this is an ominous historical parallel, because night and here marches were one of the most recognizable elements of the mass rituals and propaganda aesthetics of the Hitler regime. Such a march on January the 30th, 1933, was the way to celebrate by Nazi formations of an appointment of Hitler as a Reichschancellor. What do they say? There are no Nazis in Ukraine, but there are a lot of them, and they hold power there. But this won't go on for very long. It's telling that the state glorification of the founder of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalism today in terms of visuals and symbols. Afterwards, remains of Konovalets are meant to be taken to the so-called pantheon of national heroes created by the Kiev authorities. That is the consistent state program of historical rehabilitation of Ukrainian radical nationalism and for creation of a direct ideological continuity between the OUN and modern armed formations of Ukraine. As to the Netherlands' role, municipality of Rotterdam knowing, so there's no doubt that the Netherlands were very well aware about the political essence of this PR stunt, and they knew very well that this is the glorification of the founder of a totalitarian nationalist movement. The only justification for this can be that to have remains buried on their territory is already a shameful enough thing. But thought about something else. They thought that it will help Ukraine in their confrontation with Russia. One more topic here. The UN seemingly had a reason to talk about glorification of Nazism yet again, given the opportunity of top officials to speak out about this, to sound the alarm about this topic. In reality, happened something different. What do we see? The organization from the Secretariat to other agencies keep silence about it. It is of the situation around Ukraine in terms of morality and culture. We took note of the double standards in the work of the officials in the international organizations. They put a blind eye to the facts, inconvenient for the mainstream They sometimes forget about their mandate, and the trip of UNESCO General Director to Ukraine with a visit to Kiev, Laura, is a vivid example. The head of this international organization, I mean UNESCO, whose mandate includes such pressing issues as the protection of the rights of journalists, educational and scientific and cultural facilities, visited Ukraine. He had an opportunity to the terrible persecution of journalists, destruction of the free speech, suppression of the free speech on the territory of Kiev, of Ukraine and beyond. He could talk about children whose education turned into a military training, about their ideology they are being fed and taught and brainwashed with. He could have talked about the language, how it is but he participated in a staged performance in the Kiev and Pechor Laura. They used to expel demons from there, who occasionally attacked the monks, but now Laura. Now they are going to create a burial of Bandera, Shukhevich, and other Nazi monsters. This harms everything, from the facility itself to, I don't know, the feelings of the believers, the morals and moral values. They ignore the fact that this harms the World Heritage Site inscribed in the UNESCO list. General Director, in response to Zelensky, expressed solidarity with Kiev and mentioned that it is a pity that and I would like to note that a U.S. missile damaged the cathedral on June 15th. This goes beyond the mandate of the organizations. This is not the only example. The toxic politicizations undermine this international structure that puts a blind eye to the crimes of the Ukrainian Nazis. The previous general director, of French origin, Adresse, despite her mandate to condemn the killings of journalists, did not find the words to express solidarity and sadness following a series of terror attacks against Russian correspondents, did not include this information into her report about security of journalists. This year, the Secretariat did not mention barbaric strikes against the college in Starobelsk, where students, including underage students, were killed. It ignored this Meanwhile, UNESCO is going to respond to crisis. How and what about its mandate? What's the added value of the organization if even within its own mandate, the organization cannot give unbiased evaluations? The visit to Kiev is yet again principle of equidistance. There is Article 6 of the UNESCO main document that provides for the General Director to abstain from any actions that could influence the situation as an international official. The UNESCO officials have to fulfill their duties strictly within their mandate based on the principle of impartiality. If the General Director forgot about it or his and we will achieve this both through diplomatic channels and by providing the relevant facts. In general, while visiting the LoRa, the General Director of UNESCO could have asked questions, but what's going on with the freedom of religion in Ukraine? And what's with Christianity there? What's with Orthodoxy there? How do parishes and the clergy feel? What is going on there? But what is going on is something that we mentioned in two reports. In this very sphere, in the sphere of human rights of the believers in the published and on August 25th at 4 p.m. here in the MFA's press center. We will host a briefing of the Special Representative of the Foreign Minister of Russia on international cooperation in ensuring rights to freedom of religion, Mikhail Melech. The briefing will feature the presentation of this report. It's called and parishes. The materials of the report will include facts for 2022-2026. The briefing will be broadcast online on the website of the ministry with a simultaneous interpretation into English, Spanish, and French. The broadcast will also be available in the accounts of the MFA in our accounts and social networks. We will also disseminate this not only shocked many people, it was a big deal in the information space. Do you remember how the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung correspondent Michael Martens during press conference in Belgrade on August 8, 2026, asked the questions about the possibility to, I quote, facilitating, as he said, in killing Russians. After that, the newspaper should change its title to Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, because this is a medical case. No attempts to disavow what was said. They were not there. These words were used consciously. This was a conscious, purposeful provocation. In this regard, Russia's embassy in Berlin on August 17th sent the request to the prosecutor's office in Berlin with the request to give a legal evaluation of this statement, given the Articles 111, 113, 140 of the Criminal Code of Germany. They concern illegal actions and public endorsement of criminal activities. The German side said that probably he committed something else.
We informed the German side that under the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation, a criminal case was initiated in hatred and insulting the dignity of an individual or a group of persons. If such activities are made publicly with the use of media, they are considered particularly grave crimes. It is remarkable that the German Journalist Union saw nothing wrong in the statements by Mr. Martens, and it even protested against the criminal case initiated against Mr. Martens. Although the legal consequences of his statements caused some nervousness in the German journalist society and community, we will not stop at that. Legal assessment. Insist on it. Now I would like to leave aside the formal side, and I would like to draw your attention to the following significant fact. A bit more than 80 years have passed after the end of the Great Patriotic War. Over that time, 3 generations of Germans have changed and have passed. And himself what can be done in order to kill more Russians. Obviously, the German political and journalist landscape is not homogeneous. There is a sound part of the community, but if such statements don't cause a protest in Germany, does it mean that Mr. Martens hasn't said anything that would sound outrageous? Does it mean that it is normal in principle? In World War II, countless Martenses, so our reaction is quite moderate for now. Just think of how Germans would have reacted if a Russian journalist during a press conference would have asked what can be done in order to kill more Germans. I can hardly imagine the reaction. I can hardly imagine such a situation. During the war, there is no family who wouldn't have its relatives who knew firsthand what the, Great Patriotic War is. And we can hardly imagine that Germany could ignore such statements against Germans, even bearing in mind immediately it would have forgotten about the freedom of speech, and it would have labeled it as violation of human rights. So what's happened? There can be no double standards in that case. They simply can't be. Such things should be punished by everyone, by the laws, by the human condemnation, not by the cancel culture, but by a direct and immediate human accusation of this particular fact everywhere, regardless of nationality, religions, and so on and so forth. More justification of the fact that history hasn't taught Germans anything. Why would they need it? Every year they rewrite history. It's quite convenient. You know, they change history whenever they want it. They are simply convinced that they are right. So in history we find examples about one's own exceptionalism, about exclusivity of one's own DNA. The atrocities committed by their forefathers, the punishment of the ideologists didn't teach them a thing. So no one should think that it is just one said it occasionally. No, it is something that was deeply enrooted, apparently, in his family. He confessed himself that he is working on an essay entitled The Essay of Michael Martens. Do you know how it is entitled? Probably you don't. It's called Killing Russians. So he who is working on such an essay, he who is asking such questions, treats with love. Well, I'm not talking about Christian love, when the atrocity has been done, still love a person. Separating a person from the sin and giving him or her a right to confess a sin and never to commit it again. No, it's not that sort of love that he feels to his grandfather. Well, what's wrong about it? There's one simple fact. Hans Hermann Martens, 1936, was appointed a prosecutor by Hitler personally, and 1941 he was an officer in the staff of the Supreme Commander of the German Armed Forces, and later into the war he was a military judge of a division in the Western Front, where he pronounced verdicts to deserters. That is, after the war, he continued his political career and has never been punished. It is a typical German story. In a moment, we'll apparently Warsaw wants to put on display its militarization on the occasion of the Day of the Army of Poland. A great military parade took place in Warsaw. It was presented as the largest military parade in the history of the country. They wanted to eclipse the Warsaw Military Parade, Millennium Parade of 1966. They failed to achieve it. But it was a propaganda campaign, and everyone saw the goal for which this parade took place. It is the cultivated myth-making that the military build-up in Poland is just a forced reaction to some sort of threats allegedly coming from Russia. In his statement, President of Poland, Karol Nawrocki, drew parallel with the Warsaw Battle of August 1920. For him, one thing remained unchanged. The threat hasn't vanished. That still comes from that part, from the part of the Russian Federation. 6 years ago, let us dispel this myth and let us see at another attempt to distort history. The Soviet Russia recognized independence of Poland on December the 10th, 1918, and on the 19th of December, the Polish government ordered its troops to seize the city of Wilno. The main goal of the leadership of Poland, led by Józef Pilsudski, was to restore Poland in its historical borders of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and to establish control over Belarus, Ukraine and Lithuania with geopolitical dominance in Eastern Europe. So, where does the threat really emanate from? For a short time, the Polish troops really established the control. They even stepped into Kiev. Well, it's strange they didn't hold the current parade on the 7th of May. In June 1920, the Red Army started a counter-offensive liberated Kiev and Minsk, and in 2 months it reached Warsaw, but after such a long march, they failed to seize the city 24 years ago. But it's another story. Now back to the parade of 2026. Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, revealed the true goal of Warsaw. He promised that soon the Polish army will be the most multiple in Europe. It's remarkable that Germany too is seeking supremacy of its armed forces in the European segment of the NATO, just as Warsaw official Berlin justifies the need of accelerated military build-up by the mythic Russian threat and a shadow over the peaceful and defensive NATO. Neither Poland nor Germany are attacked from our country, while peaceful Russian citizens, Russian civilians, become victims of terrorist attacks of the criminal Kiev regime, which are committed with the assistance of Polish and German military and intelligence. There is such a political or foreign political international term as victimization of an aggressor, of oneself. It is a traditional and beloved method of military propaganda of Poland and Germany and of the entire NATO bloc. They are an aggressor themselves, but at the same time they present themselves as a victim. Let me remind you, those peaceful NATO members allocated $1.5 trillion for military expenditures in 2025, which is 55% of global military expenditures. That topic, I will keep reminding of what happened 106 years ago. Of the real history. As for Moldova, we carefully follow the situation in Moldova. Its authorities make blundering attempts to justify its course to cut off ties to traditional partners in the Eurasian space. On the 16th of August, Foreign Minister of Moldova, Mihai Popșoi, live on a local TV channel, he voiced a portion of tired cliches. Policy of having food in both camps, and according to him, the current officials fulfill the will of the citizens who stand for integration into the greater European family. It looks like they stand for integration not into the greater European family, but into Romania. What sort of term could I find for it? Self-connivance for an action. The Sandu regime has invented this term and is implementing it. In conclusion, Popșoi added that Moldova has allegedly lost 30 years while pursuing a balanced foreign policy, and now it has decided only one fact doesn't satisfy me, only one term. He said it lost 30 years. Well, but that's right in the rest. For 30 years, under Sandu, Moldova was implementing a balanced foreign policy. Obviously, such statements addressed to the Western curation one can boast about the successes of Moldova, but the real situation testifies to the contrary. I'll give you a couple of examples. First, in October 2024, a constitutional referendum was held on the accession to the EU, and diplomatically speaking, the results were dubious. Inside the country, the administrative resource was used. However, the referendum failed, and accession to the EU received only 45% of voices, and the final victory was only achieved thanks to the voices of diaspora living in Western Europe and in North America, and artificial limit to the possibility for Moldovan citizens living in Russia to vote. Secondly, according to the recent polls, only 34% are convinced that discussions about the accession to the European Union and European integration have divided the people. So most Moldovans don't support their accession to the EU. They work hard and they don't believe into the benefits of their accession to the European Union. They invest their labor, their efforts in the prosperity of their country, just as their forefathers did. Who responded to the cookies. They see the results. Third, after pro-Western forces came to power in Moldova in 2020-2021, and who announced no alternative policy for integration with the EU, the situation in all spheres of life have degraded, and it's not a result of hybrid threats or propaganda with which they try to justify it, nor it is a result of sanctions or attacks or wars, not in the least. That's how official Chisinau tries to justify it, but none of In the backdrop of mass immigration of working-age population and reduction of the birth rate, the population of Moldova over that period reduced by 250,000 people, and that is 10% of entire population. And the people of Moldova the pro-Western policy that had such results.
The external debt of the Republic increased from 3.6 to $12 billion. The trade balance deficit reached a record high $7.1 billion. The share of the agriculture, and Moldova is traditionally an agricultural country. The share of the agriculture in the country is less than 7%. The gas prices has increased by more than threefold, from 4 to 13.35 lei. The share of people with low income is 65%. People over poverty line is more than 30%. Can you tell me, please, what lead to that? Nothing that Russia does in regards to Moldova could have never led to anything like that. These are the results of the Western pseudo-European integration that in reality does not exist. It is simply the destruction of Moldova through atrocious measures that they imposed on through the Santos regime. I think we shouldn't even note that Moldova is de facto turning into a totalitarian state with no pluralism of opinions or freedom of the press. The people are imposed on values that they do not share. Moldova has lost a lot in the last 30 years. In this regard, Popshoy is absolutely correct. But the damage that the authorities in the Republic inflicted on the country by the Maria Zakharova regime shows the reality and the real goals of the Maria Zakharova regime. She serves the interests of the Western countries. She doesn't serve her own people, but they want only to trick its own people. Now, let's have a look what the European Union is doing in, as they say, the sanctions policy, and essentially as a part of the hybrid war against Russia. They seize profits from through investments of illegally Depositarium Euroclear. They were frozen in 2024 illegally. They sent 8 billion euros in such profits to Europe. Almost 3.5 billion euros were sent for procuring armaments and equipment. This is theft. It is clear that the money that has been accumulated as a result of the frozen Russian gold reserves is a crime. This money, by definition, does not belong to the European Union because their origin is the seized Russian asset. An inevitable consequence of this policy is less attractiveness of the European Union, because it is the same thing to any other country, and they will come up with a reason, with an excuse to do so, be that their own policy from the point of view of the West or something else. They'll come up with something. In May this year, the arbitrary The Bank of Russia they supported the request to immediately execute and fulfill this verdict. And the mutual claims of the European side were this verdict to be executed as soon as possible. This is nothing but the helping organization of terror attacks. I'm talking about the direct violation of the International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism of December 9, 1999, and the International Convention for the Suppression of Terrorist Bombings of December 15, 1997. The Russian Federation has the right to raise a claim against those who sponsor acts of genocide, terrorism, and other international crimes. The Europeans who involved in this theft fall into this category. There's one more wonderful story. I even didn't believe my eyes when I saw it, but it is the truth. On August the 4th was the day when in Canada the law on transparency and accountability of foreign influence came into effect. Now, in line with this law, even here in the citadel of Western values, a stricter version of the well-known laws, the US and British laws. The law creates a comprehensive system of total surveillance and accountability that concerns both individuals and legal entities, including universities, the media, and non-profit organizations. Essentially, everyone who has any ties with the so-called foreign principle, as it is written in the law, and attempts to inform the Canadian public about their opinion automatically falls under suspicion and must be registered as foreign agents. In this regard, I have a question to our Canadian non-party. Their proverbial commitment to the Western values go away. The commitment to the freedom of speech, the pluralism of opinions that they have been talking so much for more than 10 years. They have been criticizing Russia every day for the last 10 to 15 years for a similar law. But our that have been used against Russia. But where did these values go away? They had huge words. A lot of airtime was given to the idea that it is a very bad thing to develop such laws. Created a similar law, they felt the same consequences. Georgia was called many things in Canada. First of all, it's clear that when it comes to their own interests, universal values are disregarded. They are put under the carpet. Suppression of the voices unwanted. This is not the first case when the West countries first, for some reason, believe that they have the right to criticize laws of other countries, and that was a response to their activities in the first place. And at the same time, they did the very same thing. They developed similar laws. Literally denying the right of other states to develop, create their own laws, and to take legitimate steps to strengthen their national security, declaring them 21st century, contradicting human rights, and so on and so forth. So who in Canada is going to explain this? This is the latest vivid example how in practice the Western rules work. Do you remember the rules-based world order? These are these very rules. These rules exist in two versions, one for them, the other for others. Take note of the gap between the words and actions of our vis-a-vis. Do you remember how the West criticized severely the law on transparency of foreign influence in Georgia? They call it the diversion from democracy. Even the Russians is a reason to freeze the European integration. And similar attacks, repressive, incompatible with European values, were given to the Russian law about foreign agents. But when the very same logic, the requirement to disclose foreign financing changed their narrative. But instead of repression, they call it protection of sovereignty instead of persecution, transparency, and accountability. So it means that the law is very good when it is adopted in Ottawa or London, and it is very bad when it is needed to protect sovereignty of Tbilisi or Moscow. This is a classic example of double standards. The criteria for the situation changes depending on what country wants to establish the order. We deem this approach hypocritical and counterproductive. Canada, as any other state, has a right to protect their political processes. Right is denied to other states. But do you know how they explain that? They say this is a different thing. We will follow how this law is going to be practically implemented, because without any doubt it will create new serious obstacles for our bilateral relation that is already in a dire crisis. We reserve response. I say it to be on the safe side. We were surprised by the statement by the General Director of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi. He said that the UN ostensibly lost its relevance and is slowly dying. IAEA is a part of the UN. I don't know. Maybe he was talking about himself, about his secretariat, about his team. The UN should be seen through the prism of the Grossi's election campaign for the post of the General Secretary of the organization. We believe that his statements are exaggerated and aim first of all at attracting more attention of the global community in order to expand his support. The criticism towards the UN came into fashion, but probably it was more in fashion about a decade ago. some indeed try to earn more points by such statements. Indeed, the organization go through a rough patch. But why? And who is to blame? This is an important distinction here. In the recent year there have been fewer success stories at the UN, and the crisis situation where it could not rise to the occasion are more. The UN wound up on the periphery of the settlement of many international issues and got mired into bureaucracy, double standards, financial troubles. Let's have a look what happened to the UNESCO, for example, the previous general director, Maria Zakharova. So let us led to the problems when we discuss these problems. Huge part of the responsibility for the current situation at the UN rests with the General Secretary Antonio Guterres, whose position is clearly biased on the key issues in the international agenda. Under his leadership, the Secretariat got monopolized by the Western countries in violation of the principle of equitable geographical representation. The UN officials work not in the interests of the whole humanity. They implement guidelines of the collective West. They abandon principles of impartiality and equidistance. Moscow will be happy only with such a candidate and will promote a unifying agenda. We expect that the future head of the Secretariat will work to rectify the mistakes of Antonio Guterres and his team that led the UN into a crisis. But yet again, this crisis has authors. Only of the UN Security Council, the UN can become an instrument that will be effective in searching for the solutions to regional and international issues. Next topic. I would like to draw attention to several important dates. On 15 years of the establishment of the diplomatic relations. A milestone in development of our partnership was the opening of the Russian embassy in Juba in December 2025. We know that our ties are traditionally friendly. They are based on mutual respect, account of each other's interest, principles of sovereignty and non-interference into internal affairs. Right now, Moscow and Juba are set to strengthen multidimensional bilateral ties. They take steps and efforts to intensify Russia-South Sudan cooperation on various tracks and to launch new joint projects. The two states are united by their commitment to emergence of a multipolar world order, respect to fundamental universal principles and norms of the international law, recognition of the central role of the UN in international affairs. Our briefing in Rjev in July, I talked about the resorts and sites in the Tver region, and I'm happy to announce that on August 22nd, the main administration for the service to the diplomatic corps of the MFA of Russia will host in the 27th Summer Diplomatic Games. The event this year gains a special meaning. This program is built about around the idea of the year of the unity of peoples of Russia. Under their national flags, diplomats will basketball, crossbow shooting, fishing, tennis, billiards, arm wrestling, and chess. The judging panel will feature Olympic and world champions. The program will be supplemented by the entertainment relay race for the cup of the the main administration, and a festival organized within the gastronomical map of Russia federal project. Besides, the video will have an area for outdoor activities, will feature live music and attractions for the whole country. We invite the representatives of media to cover this event. The journalists will have a transfer to the venue of the event. More information on the website of the main administration, and we will give
Kazakhstan will host the fifth Kazan Global International Youth Summit, Education in the Era of Global Development, Human Capital for Sustainable Development. It will be held from the 26th to the 30th of August. It will bring together over 250 delegates from more than 50 countries. The program will have 4 key heads of leading universities, Innoverse 53 international program, youth program, and a series of expert and open discussions. Main topics will be AI and modern educational technologies, future professions and human capital, the role of innovations and youth in the global changes, in the time of global changes. A ceremony of awarding the Global Award of Youth Leaders will take place, as it will mark the greatest achievements of young innovators and authors. There will be also an event dedicated to the role of young diplomats in establishing the intercontinental space of harmonious will be attended by heads of foreign political agencies from Eurasian Economic Union, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, ASEAN, India, Iran, Laos, Myanmar, and Singapore. There will be a thematic session, Youth Dimension, the Great Eurasian Partnership, and expert discussion table with participation of the Russian MFA, the Council on Foreign Affairs, Россотрудничество, and the Strategic Vision Group, Russia Islamic World, and so on and so forth. And in 2 days, on the 22nd of August, our country will celebrate the national flag day. This day was established by the decree of the President due to restoration on the 22nd of August 1991 of the historical Russian tricolor, which is surrounded in the spirit of respect for the state symbols. The flag is something that any visitor, the first thing visitor sees when he or she comes to the Russian diplomatic mission or an official building. It was subject to provocations over time. Each episode is over all Russian buildings abroad without any exception. There have been remarkable cases related to the flag, and I would like to tell you about one of such cases. Some of our compatriots or even journalists sent me some information material. It was not an article, but it was a letter. A compatriot sounded alarm when he was passing by one of the buildings of our consulate generals. He saw that tricolor was not on its right place. Somehow it was not in a condition it should be, and our compatriot didn't ignore this. He started writing letters. He called the council. no one was present in the Consulate General, and probably due to the weather conditions, the national flag was cut off. And just imagine, our compatriot found that he was forced to Moscow as the Consulate General, and he found people in charge to make sure that the tricolor was restored on its due place. I'm not going to name the country, but when they were called from Moscow, officials of that Consulate General drove to the building and made everything was necessary in order to restore the flag on its due place. They called the workers and those from the local population who could provide assistance. And immediately the situation was resolved and rectified. It is very telling to me. It's not simply a holiday, it's not simply a remarkable date in our year. It is something that has become part of our life. It's part of our identity. It's part of our culture at the modern stage, in the modern era, and with the historical reminiscences. It is a part of our responsibility, and I believe it's wonderful. Let me remind you about the history of the tricolor. It has a rich history. 1668, in the Dedinovo village near Moscow on Oka River, one of the sail ships was being constructed. It was entitled Oriol. The construction works were led by Butler. He was invited from a different country, so he wrote a letter to Alexei Mikhailovich, to the Tsar, and he asked what flag should be raised under the ship. He asked under which flag the ship would sail. And basically he formulated one of the basic principles of the international law. The flag determines the jurisdiction. So fabric of two colors, dark blue, white and red. In what order these three colors were put in the flag, because it never reached its destination. This fabric never reached its destination, but nonetheless the flag survived and has become the national symbol. The tricolor, as we're used to see it, is composed of the three strips as his personal standard. And during the coronation of Nicholas II, the Ministry of Justice established that the white, dark blue and red colors and no others should be considered the Russian flag. Basically, there was an alternative of black, white and gold. It was an imperial dispute, and it lasted for decades, and the Peter's tricolor won. It is a symbol of the continuity of the Russian history. Now the flag is described in the constitutional law, and it is described in the following way. It is and the altitude of width of the flag to its length is 2 to 3. There is no official interpretation, and it's quite wise because interpretation lives in the souls of the people. There are lots of interpretation, and it's great. And I suggest that you formulate your own interpretation of these colors. Now, today, our military raised the tricolor over the liberated villages and towns. The space station, it is equally present at polar stations, at submarines, on the roofs of the schools from Kaliningrad to Vladivostok, everywhere. Think of its history, and it is one of the main symbols of the Russian state, and I'm ready to answer your questions. Is Международная жизнь with us? Yes, good afternoon. Would you please tell us about the preparations for the upcoming Russia-Africa summit, which is to take place in October this year? Yes, thank you for raising this topic. Indeed, there have been a lot of experts and journalists who kept asking this question, but we postponed the answer to these questions for logistics reasons, because we had to request some information, and now I can share with you some assessments. We are preparing for the third Russia-Africa summit. It will take place. Heads of state and government of all African countries are invited, as well as heads of executive bodies and of regional integration structures of the continent. Due to the mutual interest in enhancing trade and investment cooperation, we intend to focus the agenda on economic issues. In this field, we have a vast potential which hasn't been tapped in full so far. As priority topics, we'll also discuss cooperation in the field of peaceful use of nuclear energy, development of independent pay-in systems, food security, digitalization, and artificial intelligence. On the margins, there will be an economic and humanitarian forum, thematic sessions, and an exhibition. Participants will discuss strengthening Russian-African ties in the field of agriculture, healthcare, and education, as well as scientific and technical and cultural cooperation. We expect a solid package of intergovernmental documents and commercial contracts to be signed on the margins, and we note with satisfaction the interest of our partners for the upcoming event. It is for sure many African capitals have already confirmed their participation and will send representatives delegations to Moscow, including heads of civil bodies and businessmen. And there is no doubt the third Russia-Africa summit will be organized at the top level and will give a strong impetus to further development of Russian-African partnership in all fields. And we will necessarily inform you of future events. So please follow official announcements. Thank you so much. Is Sinhua with us? Maria Zakharova. Today we have the following question. On the 81st anniversary of the announcement of capitulation of Japan, Prime Minister sent a ritual sacrifice to the Yasukuni Shrine, and the Yasukuni Shrine was attended by the officials. It's been for 7th on this day. How would the Russian side comment on these activities? What real risks does this outright glorification of aggressive history bear? And it is a challenge. The actions by Japanese leaders resembles of the statement by famous Russian historian Vasily Kluchevsky. It is a very famous statement in our Russian community. Probably there are similar statements in your language. It is very simple, but at the same time it's very important. History doesn't teach us anything, it only punishes us for not knowing its lessons. Instead of recognizing the responsibility for launching aggression in Asia and in the Pacific region, and presenting excuses to those peoples who suffered in neighboring countries, and reaffirming commitment to pacifist provisions of the own constitution. Official Tokyo promotes the policy of remilitarization and whitewashing its own crimes of the military times. It reconsiders the principles of the main law of the country and intensifies discussions of the revision of 3 non-nuclear principles. We see this policy in the statement of Prime Minister Senator Kaiti and the ceremony of the day of the end of the war, and it's her ritual sacrifice for the Yasukuni Shrine, where they honor the A-class criminals condemned by the Tokyo Tribunal. We also see that the Ministry of Defense, Koizumi, visited the shrine, as well as heads of the Liberal Democratic Party. Revanchist act doesn't sentiments of the people. I'm quite sure it is a fact testifying to the loss of dignity of the Japanese people. It presents the Japanese people not as a people that still remembers the World War II, but has forgotten. It may bear great risks as it happens. Japanese people know full well, as one of main aggressors of World War II, for decades, Japan has failed to recognize its outcomes and presents itself as an innocent victim of attacks by Western powers. Japan was in a union with the fascist Germany. It should stop whitewashing the inhuman pages of its own history. They have no right to make such statements, given the tremendous victims, colossal victims of World War II, for us, the Great Patriotic War, which were a result of their terrible aggression and militarist policy. If that's all from your part, we'll move on. Is Reuters with us? Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have a question about the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. On Tuesday, the MFA issued a statement on that NPP, and it said that about the failed visit of Rafael Grossi to that site, and a short time ago, commented on the explosion at the bus stop. How would you comment on it? You know, we gave evaluations to this crime as the visit of Mr. Grossi to Energodar and the NPP failed. Ukraine is not able to stop our military activities, and Ukraine's regime attacked our civilian infrastructure. The situation on the battlefield is terrible for them, and so on and so forth. A strike against the facility near the power plant is another attempt to put under threat the physical security, the safety their attacks of the Kiev regime make them to the henchmen of the Kiev regime, and they bear full responsibility for the attacks committed by the Kiev regime. This night, the Zaporozhye NPP lost external energy sources, and it was linked to the reserve diesel generators. Have you heard anything from London and Brussels, Rome or Madrid? Have you heard any statements in Washington or in Tokyo? No. Why? Don't they understand what the consequences could be? Don't they understand that consequences will be tangible not only in Eastern or Central Europe? The consequences due to the terrorist infection of the Kiev leadership. It feels the support of the West.
The equipment worked the way it should have. There are no problems. The team maintains the power units. Radiation level is normal. I'd like to congratulate our workers in the sphere on their professional holiday and to express my appreciation and to say thank you to them for their work, given the fact that they are constantly attacked by the Ukrainian armed forces. Thank you, Madam Zakharova. If that is it, let's move on. Lenturu, are you with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions about the USSR. Question 1. It's about the statement of Vladimir Zelensky on August 3rd. He said that the presence of Ukraine is the independence of these countries. It is important for him to maintain these relations and said that he was proud to have them. What does Moscow think about Kyiv's attempt to build relations with perennial partners of games with the and flirting with the neo-Nazi regime in Ukraine? This is not only the position of the state institutions, our citizens who are targeted by the Kyiv regime. It understands the essence of the Kyiv regime, and Ukraine does not hide this essence. And ordinary people, they wonder how the officials, they are political figures in other countries, do not understand that. We condemn trips to Kiev. They kill Russian citizens, not only Russian citizens, for that matter. They have terrible ceremonies, and for the victory in the Great Patriotic War, millions of people gave their lives, and we don't understand why the representatives of the Ukrainian junta want to participate in politicized get-togethers, meetings, and to give them a podium to threaten Russia. But this should be left on their conscience. However, we won't do that. We will appeal to their conscience, but we won't pretend that we don't see any of it. They should be aware and realize what such a policy is fraught with in the context of relations with Russia. Zelensky shouldn't talk about independence of other countries because he is morally bankrupt. He usurped the power in Kiev. And Zelensky stripped Ukraine of independence and made Ukraine dependent on the resources provided by the West. He destroyed everything that we called modern Ukrainian statehood that was emerging, that was making the first country. He destroyed everything. He distorted everything. Make a joke out of it all. If that is it, now we have one more question. Oh, yes, please. Question 2. It's also about the post-Soviet space. Tbilisi plans to restore diplomatic relations with Russia in the nearest future and to sign an agreement on about not applying force in Abkhazia. Does Moscow know anything about it? I cannot take this statement seriously. I don't know. I don't know how to treat him. I could have called him a politician, but I would not. I don't want to degrade this sphere. This person stopped understanding their reality. He stopped responding in an adequate way. I could have named his country and that he's from Georgia, but I won't. In 2008, he started a bloodshed against South Ossetia and Russia peacekeepers, and the most important things against his own people, and he pretended that it was for the interest of his own people. His craziness, his political blindness, his faith in the West that it will help Georgia, all of it harmed Georgia in a way that cannot be redeemed. It made suffer thousands or tens of or even hundreds officials documents Georgian authorities expressed their opinion about him last year. This person has nothing to do with the interaction between Russia and Georgia. He wants to remind about himself by all means available to him. He wants to discredit the pragmatic policy of Georgia in relations with Russia. This cooperation brings tangible benefits to Tbilisi and ensures record rates of economic development in the country. The lack of diplomatic relations between Russia and Georgia, by the way, is also part of the tragic of the people. The decision to cut off ties was not even a mistake. was more than a crime. It was a criminal mistake. But as it was Tbilisi, well, I cannot say Tbilisi and mean the Georgian people. Saakashvili, he did that. He was the president of the country. That's why Georgia must be the initiator to restore the diplomatic relations with Russia. We're open to such an opportunity, but for now, Tbilisi about non-involvement of force with Abkhazia and South Ossetia. We have long been calling Georgia to do so. Expect such agreement would have helped prevent similar actions as happened in August 2008. Thank you. Isnews.ru. The new academic year, the Ministry of Education and Research in Moldova presented a draft plan of teaching for the subject titled History of Romanians and Global History for grades 4. We saw this document, the draft plan for teaching. We were surprised, and it is a striking absurdity. The school children in Moldova now are going to study history of Romania from ancient times until modern times, and officials in Chisinau leave no opportunity for young people in Moldova to identify themselves as citizens of Moldova. The Romanization of the educational sphere in Moldova is something that's going on for more than 1 year in the country. There was a grade 12. It had a lot of propaganda stamps and lies. In the book in Romanian language had 114 mistakes, and in the Russian language version there were 137 mistakes. How were these facts distorted? The authors justify the participation of Romania on the side of fascism, on the side of Hitler. The authors of this book whitewash the terror action to communist activities. They don't mention facts of condemnation and punishment of military criminals, including Antonescu himself. And one Romanian marshal, Gheorghe Buzatu, who was called by Antonescu himself, I quote, an ambiguous period in his life and activities. Now it's clear who inspired Maria Zakharova several years ago. Votes against the resolution of the UNGA against glorification of Nazism. However, people in Moldova reject all these attempts to rewrite the history and destroy the facts and moral values. I wonder if people in Moldova are going to be Romanians, then what country is next? That this won't be the last country. This is clear. If that is it, then we move forward. Is China's media corporation with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova. Kazan hosted the fourth international forum Sprouts Russia and China in development of trade and economic cooperation between Russia and China. What's its uniqueness? What possibilities does it create for further strengthened bilateral ties? This is a wonderful forum. It takes place annually in Tatarstan. It became a key regional platform for political dialogue between two people and the possibility to take real practical steps and launch economic projects. The uniqueness of this forum is its interregional character and orientation for practice. The main success criteria here are real projects and economic effects. This year, the business program of the forum covers almost 20 tracks, including healthcare, agriculture, transport infrastructure, creative economy, and energy. In 2026-2027, there will be cross years between Russia and China in education. The agenda of the forum included events dedicated to educational initiatives. I'm sure that joint educational programs will contribute significantly. I mean, the concept itself, the implementation of these programs will contribute significantly to the training of specialists who will be in great demand in both countries. This forum is not only a platform for discussions. This is an effective mechanism that helps build new production chains, implement innovations, and shape sustainable mechanisms of economic can be if it's initiated at the regional level. Thank you. Thanks to you. Is Russian Vector with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions today. Putin's visit to island Iturup, according to the Japanese authorities, bothered them. As a response, China called on Japan to comply with international order that was shaped following World War II. At the international level, outcomes of World War II as yet are being discussed again. The territory of Ukraine is part of the Soviet territory. Russia is the successor of the USSR. Advisor to the Russian President Kobykov said that it's necessary to give the evaluation to the destruction of it's time to revoke independence of Ukraine. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, in his statement of December 11, 2025, at the round table about the Ukrainian crisis, noted that Ukraine should return to out-of-bloc non-nuclear status. This is the foundation of their statehood. These principles of July 16, 1990. The Ukraine that was independent after the USSR was ceased to exist, had laws, and their constitutions had guarantees for the rights of ethnic Russians, Russian-speaking people, and national minorities. Today, these rights are violated by the Kiev regime. The Declaration on Principles of International Law concerning the cooperation between states under the UN Charter says that all states must respect territorial integrity of countries and that have governments that represents all the population living on that particular territory. It is clear that the Kiev regime does not meet these conditions.
It's no doubt that under conditions and the circumstances when the rights of ethnic Russians are systematically and in a barbarian and there are persecutions against the canonical Orthodox Church. There is a topic of self-identification. Crimea, Sevastopol, Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions have already implemented their right and following a referendum adopted a decision to reunite with the historical fatherland that is Russia. As for reconsidering the outcomes of World War II, our position is consistent. The reconsideration is unacceptable and is a direct threat to the international law and security with our friends and partners, including the People's Republic of to strengthen peace. And my second question, for the sake of enhancing his relations with Kim Jong-un, what do you think it is a weakness of Trump or another trick by Trump? So you see no other version, it is either weakness or a trick? Well, I think that a sovereign and independent state can itself determine the parameters of joint military exercises. What matters is they are consistent with international norms and pose no threat to anyone. And I think you'd better ask this question and ask for clarification in the American embassy or American officials for them to formulate their motivation behind this step. But there is another parameter which is important to us, which concerns us directly. We are also part of the Asia-Pacific region, and repeatedly we not at countering common threats such as piracy or international terrorism, or fight against the natural disasters. If they rather destabilize the situation and don't serve the goal of strengthening the security but rather eliminate the security, then any steps which aim at reducing the risk of an attack against security, we can only welcome such steps and watch the motivation behind them. You'd better ask the US side for clarifications. Thank you so much. I thank you. Is the Tower News Agency with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Nicola Javanadze from Tower News. Representatives of the Georgian leadership over the past time have made a couple of statements that Russophobia in Georgia is fueled artificially by the deep state from outside. In the context of the statement of Georgian government, what do you think can fuel anti-Russian sentiments and public rhetoric against Russia prevent the development of trade and tourist ties of Georgia and Russia? Well, we repeatedly stressed the strong cultural ties which link Russia and Georgia. We uphold the same values and we have a common spiritual foundation which is not influenced by time and aggressive attacks from outside. There are intertwinings of historic faiths and cultural similarity, and despite political differences, despite the statements and actions by Saakashvili, we try to establish necessary conditions for enhancing bilateral cooperation and humanitarian ties with Georgia. Over the past years, a lot has been done in order to enhance transport ties and tourism. Our cooperation is growing, and in 2023, President Putin took the decision to reinstate direct air communication and abandon visa for short-term travels for Georgian citizens. In October 2020, who visit Russia for education, work, or long-term stay, and you know better than I do how it helped the people, how it was welcomed, and how this decision was used, and how many people used it in Georgia. As a result, contacts between people intensified by 1.5 times and reached the level of 1.6 million people, and it's still growing. Every fourth tourist in Georgia is a tourist from Russia. At the same time, there have been serious case incidents with Russian citizens in Georgia. It requires our particular attention and activities on the part of the Georgian authorities. We take note of the statements of Georgian leadership, and we expect Tbilisi to take exhaustive measures in order to prevent Russo coming to Georgia. Anti-Russian sentiments and actions should be investigated, and those guilty brought to accountability. I'll stress security of our citizens visiting Georgia for tourist or business purposes is our priority. This is a position of any state to protect its own citizens. Thank you. Is Anadolu with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have one question today about the elections to the State Duma. Will foreign observers and representatives of international organizations be present, and if yes, then who exactly? I'll begin with the theory. In the context of your question, I think it's important to speak about theory. International observation is one of the cornerstones in ensuring the legitimacy and transparency of any elections in Russia. We've always paid particularly attention to this topic, bearing in mind the peculiarities of our electoral system and our unique electoral technologies. And we continue to be one of initiators of newly possessed standards in the field of international observation. They are based on sovereign quality of states and non-interference into domestic affairs. So we consider invitation of foreign observers and constructive cooperation with them in the context September not as a tradition. Presence of international observers is an important factor of strengthening trust to the electoral process in the country and outside. I'll remind you how in 2021 and 2024, international experts had a possibility to see the effectiveness of the electoral practices in our country. And this year we sent invitations to 12 international organizations and more than 100 countries. As of today, representatives of 55 of them have already confirmed their Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, ASEAN, Africa, Middle East, and Latin America. On the 12th of August, the first accreditation card was issued to Deputy Secretary General of the CIS, was issued to Mr. Nematov. He will head the observation mission of the Commonwealth of Independent States, of observers from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It will be represented at the level of a Deputy Secretary General, and it is a testimony to the vast interest of foreign partners to the electoral procedures in our country. They are ready to contribute constructively to enhance the transparency and legitimacy of the voting. We share this approach together with the Federation Council and the State Duma, with the coordinating role of the Central Election Commission of Russia. We will provide, as an MFA, a cooperation assistance in order to make sure they are comfortably staying in Russia. Thank you. Is Interfax with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have a question about the U.S. Korean exercises. So we have already given an answer. Thank you. Is about news with us? Latvian doctors left a man without help, medical assistance, with a strike because he asked them in the Russian language. What is Russian diplomacy doing in order to record these facts? Are you going to highlight these incidents on international platforms? Well, what if this person addressed the medicals in a language of a South Asian state? What happened then? Often happens that a person cannot express his thoughts and only tries to explain something with the gestures or some sounds. Particularly in the context that we see it on the territory of a European state. It's unacceptable for a country that is just starting its history as an independent state. Even in that sense, it is inadmissible, unacceptable. And if we are talking of a country that is a member state of the United Nations, NATO, and the European Union, and delegates its representative into the ruling bodies of some European bodies, and it's terrible, it's a shame. When Latvian authorities speak about the level of democracy and global catastrophes, if they think that they have enough experience in order to pronounce their opinion, then I'll advise them to look at the situation. One case of inhuman steps of one particular individual. It is a result, it's just of one fruit because it got enough. It is a consequence of the Russophobic policy pursued by the Latvian authorities. It is a neo-Nazi policy. Now the consequences have reached common patients. It is simply unsafe to speak Russian, and they demonstrate it. That's just common fascism. The MFA of Russia follows the situation around inhumane treatment of Latvian authorities of Russian compatriots and citizens in the context of language discrimination. We record information about mass violations of human rights and discrimination of our compatriots in Baltic states. We condemn barbarian activities of Latvian neo-nationalists against the Russian citizens. We include such records in our annual report on violation of the rights of Russian citizens and compatriots abroad. A most recent report was published in December 2025. It was presented in the Russian MFA. The violations are also recorded in the joint report of MFAs from Russia and Belarus. Recently, such a report was published in June 2026. We also reflected in annual reports of the Russian neo-Nazism and other manifestations fueling modern forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. Given the systemic nature of discriminating steps of Latvian authorities and Latvian nationalists against Russian citizens and compatriots, we raise this issue at international platforms at the UN and OSCE. We demand a due reaction of human rights organizations. This case will be no exception. It won't be left without consequences. Russian MFA will continue taking steps in order to draw the attention of international community. Manifestation of neo-Nazism. Thank you so much. There was a musical festival in Latvia. People came from different countries. I wonder, when they spoke other language than Latvian, didn't they provide service? Didn't they receive assistance at hotels, cafes, or somehow they were treated, they were accommodated in the hotels, they were sold water or food when they approached someone in a language other than Latvian? It is a hypocrisy. It's simply hypocrisy. But now it has a neo-Nazi nature. 80 years ago, neo-Nazis was on the rise in Latvia. Is Alma Yedin with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have one question. On the 9th of August, the Syrian MFA said it signed a memorandum of understanding, announced a signature of memorandum of understanding with Russia, which will be the new format of Russian presence and what will be the tasks of joint educational centers. We consider the signature of memorandum of the 9th of August between Russia and Syria on the functioning of joint logistics and education training centers in Khmeimim and Tartus as an important step aimed at enhancing bilateral cooperation in the military field and enhancing the legal framework for cooperation under the new conditions. We believe it will be based on the long-term experience of cooperation between our countries. A possible example is restoration of direct flights between Moscow and Damascus. The first flight took place on the 16th of August. Regular flights will be administered on Sundays. Thank you. Is Apostolskaya жизнь and Madam Zakharova. We have one question. For many years, Serbia has been considered one of the closest partners of Russia in Europe. But after the visit of Zelensky to Belgrade and statements by President of Serbia Vučić about the territorial integrity of Ukraine and its way towards the EU, doesn't Moscow ask itself, is Belgrade still a partner? Wait. I see the lack of logic in your question. One cannot approximate Kiev. With Kiev, you can only sink to the bottom. The silence by the Serbian leader Vučić in response to the Russophobic rhetoric at the press conference about the extermination of the Russian people. Well, I'm sure he found attitude of the Serbian people to such provocations.
As to Zelensky's visit, I have talked quite enough about it today. Is Zvestia with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have one question today. Did the Russian MFA receive the response from the US and Turkey about the possible transfer of the US armaments to Ukraine through the Turkish territory? We indeed saw such an information in the media. It cites the documents published by the US Congress about plans to transfer a large a number of armaments and munitions to the Ukraine that right now are in the Turkish army. The Russian MFA requested the US and Turkey for clarification to receive it soon. Is Golos Atechestvo with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. We have one question. Finland supplied Ukraine with do they do this with international law, or will there be any repercussions from Russia? Helsinki has supplied the Kiev regime with aid worth more than 4.7 billion euros. Majority of it, about 3.4 billion euros, goes for armaments and munitions. Their goal is to inflict as much damage to the battlefield to Russia as possible. And the Helsinki say that they want to ensure Kiev with strong positions in negotiations around the Ukrainian crisis. This aggressive policy has nothing to do with the international law. It has they act obliviously in terms of history. Finland, just like other Western states, violate their obligations as neutral sides under the Convention on Rights and Obligations of Neutral Powers, and in case of an armed conflict of 1907. As a result, it cannot be respected by Russia as it could have been if it were neutral in this conflict. By providing large-scale assistance to Kiev, Helsinki as one step from becoming of this conflict. No hostile step of Helsinki won't go unresponded. Russia will consistently work to achieve all the goals set by our government. Are there any more questions? If no, then I would like to say goodbye to you. See you next time. I wish you